Today, many Jews ascend Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, according to halacha. According to halacha, everybody knows that it's absolutely forbidden by Torah law to ascend the Har HaBayit today. There are many halachic problems. We don't know exactly where the Beit HaMikdash stood, so you're not allowed to walk anywhere on the Temple Mount. And anyway, it's the Nisur of Karet. It is forbidden because we are all Tamei Met. We are all impure on account of contact with the dead. After all, we don't have a para aduma, a red heifer, so we can't purify ourselves properly to ascend the mount. And everybody knows that all the Gedolei Yisrael are against going up. What about Mora Mikdash, the commandment which instructs us to have proper reverence for the Beit HaMikdash? Isn't Mora Mikdash itself the reason why we should not be going up? And Jewish presence on the Temple Mount angers the Muslims, and therefore going to the Temple Mount places Jews in danger. It's a sakana. And anyway, there's no reason to go up. We have the Kotel, and the Kotel is the holiest place for us today. The truth is, according to halacha, Jews most certainly can and should ascend to the Temple Mount today, an act known as aliyah, ascending to Har HaBayit. Let's address each one of these points. First of all, we don't know where the Holy Temple stood. We do know where the Beit HaMikdash stood, and we know exactly where we are allowed to go and where we are not allowed to go. The most authoritative and accepted opinion, based on knowledge and an uninterrupted chain of tradition, informs us as a certainty that the Dome of the Rock is located exactly over the site of the Kodesh Kedoshim, the Holy of Holies. This means that we are able to measure and determine where the Mikdash stood, and thus avoid entering into the forbidden areas of higher sanctity. It's important to note that the Temple Mount is a very large area, 37 square acres, the equivalent of 25 football fields. However, not all of this area has the same level of Kedusha as the original sanctified Temple Mount. The sanctified Temple Mount in the time of the First Holy Temple was 500 square cubits. Today, as a result of King Herod's expansion in the time of the Second Temple, the mount is almost 5 times this size. When we go up to the Temple Mount, it is to these areas of lesser sanctity that we ascend, while scrupulously avoiding the area of the temple itself. In fact, the route which is taken to ascend the mount in accordance with halacha goes nowhere near any of the areas that would make one liable for a punishment of karet. In any event, first-time ascenders to the Temple Mount should go with a knowledgeable person who is familiar with the proper route. Okay, but what about Tumat Met? Today, as everyone knows, we are all Tamei Met, and there are areas on the mount that are forbidden to enter because of this. The issue of the impurity of death is irrelevant, because as we have just mentioned, those who ascend the Temple Mount today are careful to distance themselves completely from the area of the Chel, the point beyond which someone in a state of Tuma could not enter. These outer areas of the Har HaBayit are completely permissible for Tamei Met to enter. In fact, even a corpse itself is allowed in this area of the Temple Mount. This halacha is universally accepted. Thus our sages relate that Moshe Rabbeinu took the bones of Yosef HaTzadik with him to a place in the desert tabernacle encampment equivalent in sanctity to the Levitical camp on the Temple Mount. But what about the mitzvah of Mora Mikdash? Isn't it a Torah commandment to show proper reverence for Hashem at the location of the Holy Temple? Which is why we should refrain from going to the Temple Mount altogether. We need to show Mora Mikdash. Actually, it's mistaken to think that Mora Mikdash means that we should show reverence by avoiding the Temple Mount. The Rambam himself clarifies that Mora Mikdash is a mitzvah taseh, a positive commandment which we fulfill by going to the Temple Mount and showing reverence for Hashem at the site of the Mikdash and behaving there according to a specific code of conduct. The way that one walks on the Har HaBayit demonstrates proper reverence. He cites specific examples of appearance and decorum, such as not entering with a walking stick or with dusty feet, and not openly carrying money, and more. Maimonides bases these statements on the Mishne with an added emphasis that all this applies today as well. Maimonides himself ascended the Temple Mount and prayed there. He writes that Mora Mikdash remains in effect even while the temple remains in its state of Chorban, and therefore, one should only enter for the purpose of mitzvah and only to the permitted areas. In the next chapter of this series, we will delve into the exact halachic details of how one should prepare for ascending the mount. Wait a minute, did you say the Rambam himself went up to the Har HaBayit? Yes, Maimonides recorded his perilous ascent to the Temple Mount, which took place on the 6th of Cheshvan, which was October 21st, 1166, in a moving published letter. Despite the perilous journey, he traveled to Jerusalem in order to ascend the Temple Mount to pray, because first and foremost, the Har HaBayit is the place of prayer. Indeed, prayer and Moreh Mikdash are two positive commandments that can be performed on the Temple Mount in our time as well. This is the Rambam's intention by his statement that one should only enter for the purpose of mitzvah, because we do not visit the Temple Mount as tourists, but in order to be seen there by God to fulfill these commandments. Still, isn't it better just to pray at the Kotel Maravi, the Western Wall? That's the place that's holiest for the Jewish people. Actually, the Western Wall may be considered holy because of the many prayers said there over the centuries, but ironically, the Western Wall had no significance or intrinsic holiness at all in the time of the Holy Temple. As opposed to the Temple Mount, which is mentioned countless times in classic Torah sources, the Western Wall is not mentioned, neither in the Mishne, nor the Talmud, nor in the works of the Rishonim. It's not even a wall of the temple. It's an external retaining wall of the outer Temple Mount complex built to support the massive expansion that was begun in the Herodian era. But wait a minute, you say the Kotel Maravi is not mentioned in any ancient source? What about the Midrash that specifically states that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, never departed from the Western Wall? Well, first of all, you have to understand that the sages who authored that statement did not see the Western Wall as we know it today as being a place of any importance. After all, the sages of Israel were still ascending to the Temple Mount and praying there many years after the temple's destruction. It was only much later in history, when Jews were prevented by the foreign rulers of Jerusalem from ascending to the Temple Mount, that the Western Wall began to be used as an alternative place for prayers. So what were the sages referring to when they taught that the Shekhinah never departed from the Western Wall? According to numerous sources, this statement is a reference to the Western Wall of the Heichal, the location of the Holy of Holies, the back wall of the temple sanctuary. Now, what about the danger of ascending the Temple Mount? Visitors to the Temple Mount are accompanied by Israel police officers who are tasked with protecting those who enter. While the police do not allow Jewish worshippers to pray outwardly, they do protect and defend Jews who ascend to the Har. There is no danger in visiting the Mount, and personal security is safeguarded. What about the Gedolei Yisrael, the leading rabbis of this generation? Isn't it true that some rabbis have forbade going up to the Temple Mount? The truth is, all the great poskim, throughout all the generations, permitted entering into the area of the Temple Mount outside the area where the Mikdash actually stood. This includes the Rambam, the Ramban, the Chida, the HaMeiri, the Radbaz. In recent times, a controversy arose based on questions regarding the exact location of where the Beit HaMikdash stood. And some rabbis feel that we simply do not know where on the Temple Mount the temple was actually located, so their position is that we shouldn't go up at all. In general, the Jewish people suffered a disconnect from the Har HaBayit over the course of the long years of exile. Many generations had no first-hand experience of the area, and because these laws were not considered to be practical, precise knowledge was sometimes inadvertently replaced by speculation. Much doubt crept into the subject, but education is the solution to this problem. In our generation, many leading rabbis have reconnected with the ancient knowledge of the exact dimensions pertaining to the halachic reality of the Temple Mount. And having mastered this knowledge, these rabbis not only permit, but encourage ascent to these permitted areas of the Temple Mount. Today, many Roshei Yeshiva and leading rabbis bring their students to the Temple Mount regularly to fulfill the mitzvah of Moreh Mikdash. Okay, even if I am in no immediate physical danger, doesn't Jewish presence on the Temple Mount enrage the Muslims and endanger the Jewish people in general? Well, there are a lot of things that enrage the Muslims, like Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, like the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In fact, like the very existence of the State of Israel and Jewish presence anywhere on earth. But we don't build homes in the land of Israel to make anybody angry, but because we belong here, because it's our home. And we are not going up to the Har HaBayit to make the Muslims angry, but to pray there and to be seen there by God as we are commanded, and to connect with the place that He chose to rest His presence for all eternity. We are here to live our lives as Jews by fulfilling God's will, As soon as we are afraid to live our lives as Jews, that's when we are really in danger. The only holy place for the Jewish people is the Temple Mount, where our patriarchs prayed, where the Holy Temple stood, and from where the Shekhinah, the Divine Presence, never departed. The Temple Mount is called the Gateway to Heaven. It's the place designated for prayer, the place where God wishes to see us, the place to which all prayers are to be directed, and the place where all prayers are answered. Please check out all the sources for the lessons discussed in this video in the description text below, and please feel free to join in the conversation in the comments section. If you liked this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel for more Torah teachings every week.